Aha! This is Laborc, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. As you can see, I primed the Mini Black with Vallejo's Black Primer. Our first base coat is going to be dried bark. Cover the fur coat, the leather straps, the hair, the wooden part of the axe, and his boots with that color. Now we are dry brushing Morphine Brown on top of our dried bark layer. Wet your dry brush just a tiny bit to prevent creating dusty look. Papa Laborc's only hitting the Mini from one direction with his brush. We want to leave those dark areas where the light wouldn't go naturally. Notice that our highlight is appearing nicely, and there are no dusty particles of paint. I do not apply any pressure to the brush. We start to pick out some of the hairs in the fur with Ushapti bone. You see the paint is flowing nicely from my brush, and you should try to aim for that consistency, but be careful not to go too diluted, because the paint gonna go into the crevices and you're going to lose some definition. Also, Papa Laborc will slap on your tiny hand. After that, we are using some brown ink. It will give us a nice, warm and saturated effect. It will also tone back our Ushapti bone just a little bit. We go back with Ushapti bone with a heavy glaze consistency and only paint the hairs that are closer to the face to build up the focus to the upper body area. Now we start working on the skin and the face parts. Now with Bachmann's Glow, leave the extreme shadows black and use a base layer consistency. Now we blend in the Bachmann's Glow to create a smoother effect between the black and the brown parts. You might need a couple of layers, but don't go overboard with glazing because you will lose the shadow areas, and then Papa Laborc might have to slap on your tiny hand. I'm painting the eyes with ivory. Unfortunately, the left eye got some mold line on it. Hope you don't have that, because carving out mold lines on a tiny model's eye is a bit of a pain in the ass, but I worked around it. We start building up our highlights on the face, and it is very important to see the consistency of the paint I'm working with. It's more like a heavy glaze, and we build up our coverage over 2 or 3 layers. Paint the eyebrows, the cheeks, the upper part of the mouth, the jawline, and the mouth, and the nose. And don't paint over our shadows. At this stage, I painted the inside of the mouth red and her teeth and fangs gray. That's right, her. It's a chick ogre or a she ogre. Okay? Okay. After that, I put some ivory in there to create a separation between the teeth and give some highlight to the fangs. You want to leave some of the gray to show between the ivory so it will look like teeth. I kept increasing the contrast on the face, and guys, look at the paint consistency. Again, I'm using thin down paint for this to flow from my brush nicely, yet it's not too runny, so I have nice control over it. Then it's glazing time with the same technique. We are using colors that are close to each other in value, so one layer will do just fine. We go higher with our contrast and add some even flesh to our barbarian flesh and focus on the upper part of the eyebrows. As you see, it blends in nicely to our previous layers, and after that we blend in the colors with some glazing to increase that smoothness. Then I apply even flesh to smaller areas and increase the contrast on the skin. For the last highlight, I light some glaze with the mixture of even flesh and ivory, and our face is basically done. We add some shine to her hair with Steel Legion red, and to get that shiny hair effect, we put some Ushapti bone on the Steel Legion drab layer. When you go in there with Ushapti bone, just try to hit a lock of hair and not the large surfaces. Now we do those large and nice bone powders. We cover the whole surface of them with Monfeng brown, base layer consistency and no Mickey Mouse. Then I sketch out the highlights with the mix of Ushapti bone and Monfeng brown. I highlight the same part on every horn groove and try to outline all the horn separated parts. As you see, I use a very thin coat and the result is not smooth, but that's okay, we will smooth this out. And because of the separate coats, it will blend in very, very nicely. Now I'm adding Ushapti bone in a base layer consistency. I use some stippling to make it easier to blend and add some texture to it as well. It is very important to pick out the edges with this color too, to get some definition between the bone grooves. So shape your brush to have a nice tip and do not dilute your paint too much with water, otherwise it's gonna go into the crevices. And if that happens, you need to go back with black lining or brown lining, because you don't need to use black all the time if you are recess shading. Now we go back to work on the skin. Try to add some muscle fibers to her chest with some horizontal lines, so it will give her skin a more masculine look. Because let's face it, this is not a Fiona type of ogre, okay? Don't get me wrong, Shrek is a masterpiece. After that we further increase the contrast with pure barbarian flesh, only this time you cover less surface on the muscle. For our last highlight on the skin, I add some elven flesh to the barbarian flesh and add a tiny bit of that to the surface. And this is the point where I stop with the skin highlights. We want the focus on our miniature to be on her head and not on her upper biceps. I went back to the horns to increase the volume of highlights a tiny bit with a touch of ice yellow. It's more of a heavy glaze consistency, so it blends in nicely. Now we start working on the metal part. Cover every armor and weapon with Dark Reaper nice and evenly, but try not to hit the crevices because it will make your life a bit easier at the next step. But why, Papa Laborts? What will happen next? I am glad you asked. It's black lining. So grab a brush with a pointy tip and hit those crevices like Shrek hits Fiona and try to be precise as you can. No runny paint because I will slap on your tiny hand. Especially blackline the bottom part of the rivets. It will give you nice definition and gonna look great. After that, we sketch out the highlights on the armor. I'm using Dunstone, which will complement our steel look. If you have no clue how to sketch out highlights on NMM, just hold your mini under a lamp while it's black and take a photo of it. Of course, metal behave a bit differently than other surfaces because it's very reflective, but you can almost get away with picking out random parts if your highlight areas follow the general shape of the armor and weapon. I mean, obviously try not to paint triangles on a flat surface because that doesn't gonna make much sense, does it? Okay? Okay. Now we blend our Dunstone on the armor. If you sketched out the highlights well, it's gonna blend nicely. But on the X, it's gonna take a couple more layers because it's a flat surface, and blending on flat surfaces usually takes more time to blend. But Papa Laborts know that you will blend this just perfectly. We are increasing the contrast with Administratum Grey. The best gray there is, period. Now, remember the rivets and the black lining? Now put a little Administratum Grey on the top of the rivet and tell me that black lining was not worth it. See? I told you. Do every rivet like this and put some Administratum Grey on the Dunstone parts, on the armor and the axe. Now it's starting to look like metal, isn't it? But we are not done yet. Just a little more blending and we can use our final highlight. With ivory, we go through all of the rivets again. Base layer consistency. If your paint gets runny here, you have to repeat the whole process again. And Papa Laborts really don't want you to do that, so please watch your paint consistency so you will smile all the way and be happy about the process. But most importantly, Papa Laborts won't have to slap on your tiny hand like this. Then of course we are blending all the parts with ivory like there is no tomorrow and to achieve a smooth metallic surface. After that we edge highlight with white, but only the edges that are facing up. No edge highlight on the parts where they face down, because that's just Mickey Mouse. To set the metallic effect a bit more, we add some secondary highlights with administratum gray, and we will glaze that too to smooth it out. Now it's time for the shiny spiky little shields on her body. We cover all of them with dried bark, and we will do a desaturated gold look, because let's face it, ogres probably don't have very nice things, so I think her gold armor wouldn't look as shiny and yellow. Then we go in with Steel Legion drab and cover 80% of the plates. Base layer consistency, no Mickey Mouse. Try to think of the surface as a clock, and you want to cover the parts between 7 and 2 o'clock. Glaze the Steel Legion drab to smooth it out a bit, even one layer is enough. Now with a heavy glaze mixture of Talar Sand and Ice Yellow, paint the same parts, just reduce the surface of your highlight area. You can play with the mixture here, going lighter with the glaze to get a smoother result. After that, pick out some tiny areas with ice yellow with a heavy glaze consistency. Then we finish up our plates with tiny dots and lines of white. Now we do the tiny horns. We use the same method as we used with the pauldrons, cover them with Morfeng brown, then highlight them with a 50-50 mix Morfeng brown and Ushapti bone, and use pure Ushapti bone for the final highlight. The main difference between these and the pauldrons, we are not glazing anything. These colors will roughly blend in on a tiny surface and look good for gaming. And the same goes for the skull on his belt and for the bone ring that holds her cape. Alright, to be honest, I'm not sure if this is a leather strap or a mod line on her arm, because on the back of the arm there was nothing, but it was too well sculpted for a mod line. Anyway, I used dried bark on it and left it as it is. I finished up her earrings the same way I did with the tiny plates, but I didn't glaze anything, and now she has her nice jewelry done. There is a possibility that I covered the boots with dried bark previously, so please do that. And then sketch out some highlights with Morfeng brown. Now we edge highlight and also put some highlights on the leather with a mix of Ushapti bone and Morfeng brown. This is more of a heavy glaze. This will give some nice shine to her lady boots, and if you are done with that, then the boots are finished. lovely toes left to be painted, same way as her skin, and try to create some separation between her toes and her toenails. It's a minor detail, but will make her toenails pop. Put some elven flesh at the end of the toenails to create the effect that she has the same nails as a human. Then we paint the base black, and for our final touch, with a very thin glaze of Vazdaka red, we cover the dark and mid-tone parts. And now our beautiful ogre woman is done with a nice blushing face. Look at her. She is beautiful. I really hope you enjoyed this little painting adventure. If you liked the video, please do give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. I hope the rest of your day will be smooth as a granny's butt cheek. And please subscribe.